Welcome back and thanks for being here. Let's jump right into today's case. Today I want to talk about the Reinhardt family murders that occurred in Gainesville, Florida in May of 2021. While this case happened pretty recently, there's already been a lot of interesting facts that have been revealed to us, including information about the Reinhardts' family history and some details about some disturbing behavior that led up to these murders. Looking at the details of this case, it's hard not to relate this tragedy to the crimes of other family annihilators like Josh Powell or Chris Watts. Yet I haven't really seen much media attention beyond local Florida news coverage. While the Powell and the Watts cases garnered national media coverage, this case has really flown under the radar. And I'm not really sure why that is, because just a month after these murders took place, there's a lot of information that we can analyze and learn from. So in this video, I'm gonna walk you through everything that we know about the Reinhardts and the timeline leading up to the murders. At the end of the video, I do want to talk about some of the psychology behind family annihilators and people who commit filicide, which is the killing of your own children. There have been some studies done that provide interesting information about filicide risk factors and whether or not these cases can be prevented in the future, because it actually happens a lot more than any of us would like to think. So let's get into it. The Reinhardt family murders took place in Gainesville, Florida on May 4th of 2021. But this crime seems to be the catastrophic crescendo of a lifelong buildup. 46-year-old Paul Reinhart was born and raised in Florida, and it's reported by the Gainesville Sun that he had at least 4 siblings. While we don't know a whole lot about his early childhood, we do know that Paul Reinhart lived a relatively normal life. From the outside, he looked like a successful, well-adjusted person. As an adult, he started his own medical supply company that he named after his family, called Reinhardt Medical LLC. As the president of this growing company, he made a pretty comfortable living. On May 19th, 2001, he married a beautiful woman named Mindy Prince, who would later give him 2 beautiful sons. For most of the marriage, Mindy worked for Reinhardt Medical LLC. She held the position of vice president, so she was working directly under her husband. The family was pretty well off financially. They had a boat and a $900,000 vacation home on the coast of Florida, so they were very comfortable. Mindy and Paul were married for about 5 years before they ended up having their first kid. Mindy took motherhood very seriously, and she wanted to set herself up to be the best mother that she could be. She knew that raising kids is a big deal, and she wanted to make sure that she did it right. Mindy said, quote, "It took years for me to decide to have children and to want children. I wanted to do it the right way. I wanted to make sure that when they were born, I could focus 100% of my life on them, and I did." End quote. So the couple had 2 kids. They first had their son Rex, and then later they had another son named Brody. And it really does seem like Mindy did dedicate most of her life to those boys. She seemed like a great mom. Rex and Brody loved baseball, and Mindy's Facebook page is basically dedicated to her son's athletic interests. She was there to cheer them on through every game, and she was so proud of them. Everyone who knew the boys said that they were full of love and life and energy. Rex and Brody were 3 years apart, but they really acted like best friends. They were inseparable. A family friend said that if you saw one of them around, you were likely to see the other because they were best friends. Rex didn't treat Brody like an annoying little brother. He always included him with his friends and his teammates, even though they were on different baseball teams. Rex and Brody also did well in school, and overall they just seemed like great kids, really affectionate and well-behaved and active. The Reinhardts really seemed like the perfect all-American family. They had a lot of professional photos taken of them throughout the years, and even though the photos are pretty staged, they look happy. They look like they all love each other. And what's more about it is when you look at the pictures like that, they could easily be your next door neighbors or your cousins or something. Like they seem so, normal. Looking at those pictures, you wouldn't suspect anything sinister or really messed up, but it's there. They took a lot of trips together as a family. It looks like they spent a lot of time outdoors and at their vacation home. Mindy's Facebook is full of pictures of them like fishing and on the boat that they have, so they just seem like a happy, healthy family. Like I said, they seem normal, you know, I mean, whatever normal is, but in 2014, the family faced an unexpected tragedy that no doubt strained the marriage between Paul and Mindy and probably shed a light on some of the emotional disturbances of Paul Reinhart and other members of his family. So remember how I said that Paul has at least 4 siblings? Well, the only one we have much information on is his older brother, Eric Reinhardt. And in 2014, Eric had just gone through a really messy divorce and custody battle. His wife, who he shared 2 kids with, had left him for another man who she was now living with. And Eric did not handle this well at all. Divorce and custody battles are some of the most difficult things that we can go through in our lives, and it stirs up a lot of really intense emotions. And when people don't cope with those emotions or don't know how to cope with those emotions, it can lead to irrational, very drastic behavior, and that's exactly what happened with Eric. So in 2014, Paul's brother, Eric Reinhardt, went to the home that his ex-wife was sharing with her new boyfriend. He broke into their house and stabbed her new boyfriend to death. Eric's ex-wife called the police from a hiding spot inside the house, and luckily she wasn't harmed, but when the police arrived on the scene, they found obviously her dead boyfriend, and Eric was bleeding out from self-inflicted stab wounds to the neck and stomach. Allegedly, he begged officers to kill him right then and there to like put him out of his misery. But of course, you know, he was taken to the hospital and he survived and was charged with murder. And Paul chose to support his brother through this, emotionally and financially. Apparently, Paul covered all of Eric's legal fees throughout this time, and that must have been pretty expensive because it took 4 years for this to actually see trial. And when Eric Reinhardt was finally in front of a judge, he was sentenced to 40 years in prison for second-degree murder, which he clearly deserved, you know? During the trial, Eric had tried to use the defense of mental health issues. He said that he had been dealing with major depressive disorder and anxiety, but his defense team was unable to provide any proof of this diagnosis. There was no documentation provided in court. So that's kind of up in the air whether or not he really had these disorders, but I think clearly there was a lot of stuff that he was struggling with mentally and emotionally. Whether that was major depressive or anxiety, I don't know, but it definitely was serious if he went in and stabbed this man, so, and then himself. The actions that he took clearly display mental disturbance. Eric clearly did not have the emotional capacity or the coping skills to deal with his pain in a healthy manner. And even though Paul Reinhart wasn't involved in that 2014 crime, I think it's very telling to see the parallels between these two brothers. They both ended up taking drastic measures when they thought that stuff was out of their control. And it reminds me a lot, like side note, but it reminds me a lot of Josh Powell and his brothers, and how there was just a lot of messed up stuff happening in that family, and both siblings exemplified it in different ways. And another side note, I think that this is why it's really important to have some type of like education around healthy relationships and coping skills and like all that kind of stuff, because we have health classes and like sex ed and stuff in our schools, but we don't really talk about the important stuff, at least not in my school. They kind of just told us this is how babies are made. They didn't really focus on romantic relationships a lot, and I think people, when they get heartbroken, it's a turmoil that's unlike any other, and it can be really hard to deal with, and it can feel like there's no end or no way out. And there is, and a lot of time it just takes like life to kind of teach you there or get you there. But like people like this, people like Eric Reinhardt, and eventually what Paul Reinhart ends up doing, they obviously could not cope with the deterioration of a relationship, and it drove them to literally murder. And this isn't the first time that we've seen something like this. So I even with just like domestic abuse and stuff, we need to have stuff about healthy relationships. I got off track here. We're gonna circle back. So even after Eric was sentenced to 40 years for second-degree murder, Paul Reinhart still really supported his brother and showed him a lot of emotional support. We don't really know how that 2014 crime affected Mindy and the kids, or how it impacted Mindy and Paul's marriage, but I feel like it had to be incredibly disturbing for the entire family. I can only speculate, but given the severity of what Eric did, if I were Mindy, I would be concerned and questioning the level of support that Paul is showing for Eric, you know? I'd be like, you don't agree with this, right? And like, you're disgusted and upset about it too, right? Because it's one thing to support your brother and want to be there for him even after he commits a heinous act, but it's another thing to be like, you were in the right, like, you go guy. Like, we don't know what those conversations were like or how either of them felt, but like I said, I'm just speculating. I'm thinking like, if that were me, I would be like, you're supporting him through all of this, like emotionally and financially, but like, please tell me you don't condone what he did, right? But I don't think we'll ever really know how those conversations went, if they even happened at all, or what they looked like. Mindy and Paul could have had many conversations about it. They could have reached an understanding and an agreement, but we don't know those facts, and we probably never will. But despite all of this, Rex and Brody were still thriving in school and on the baseball diamond. Rex was playing for the Florida Heat, and Brody was soon to be following in his footsteps. But somewhere along the way, things got rocky in the relationship between Mindy and Paul. Paul ended up being terminated from his position as president of the company that he started. Company records still state Mindy as the vice president, and I'm just speculating, we don't really know, but I think it would be a huge blow to Paul's ego and his mental health. According to a 2019 study by the Journal of Occupational Health Psychology, factors associated with losing a job can result in increased depression. It's normal to feel negative emotions after being laid off, but when you don't have the coping skills to deal with that and bounce back, it can start to affect other areas of your life, including your personal relationships. By 2020, it was clear to Mindy that the relationship was over, and by 2021, she had moved out and filed for divorce. Paul allegedly wasn't handling this well at all and was having a really hard time coming to terms with his wife's decision. In the months leading up to the murders, Paul confessed to Mindy that he was having some, quote, awful, inappropriate thoughts. But as far as we know, he never sought any type of help or treatment for his mental and emotional struggles. As the couple's would-be 20th wedding anniversary approached, Paul began exhibiting some really concerning behavior, but by this time, Mindy had already moved out of the house that they once shared, and she was really just focusing on her future and her kids. This brings us to the day of the murders. In the early hours of May 4th, 2021, Mindy awoke from her sleep in a daze. She opened her phone to check Facebook. She probably planned to scroll through some casual content before drifting back to sleep. But what she came across frightened her to her core, and instead of going back to sleep, she ended up jumping into her car to drive to the home that she once shared with Paul. Early that morning, Paul Reinhart had logged into Facebook and posted 64 pictures, all from the wedding day that he shared with Mindy back in 2001. This was very concerning to Mindy. She could tell that Paul was in some type of emotional turmoil, and she didn't know exactly what was going on, but seeing his post just really freaked her out and made her feel like she had to go and check on her boys, which is why she had started to drive to their old house. As she drove, Mindy really started to fear the worst. On her way to Gainesville, she was calling Paul over and over again, but he wouldn't pick up. When Mindy arrived at the house that she and Paul used to share, she found nearly 400 photographs scattered throughout the entire house. And these were photographs from their wedding day, from family vacations, birthdays, and other special events. And this was spine-chilling to her. It's spine-chilling to me even just talking about it. I would be freaking out too. And she looked all over the house, but she couldn't find Paul or the boys. There was no one home. Her heart just sank, and mine would too. I feel like anybody in her position would have just feared the worst. Even the family dog was nowhere to be found. So of course, Mindy's like freaking out on the inside, but she was really trying to keep her cool because she knew that she needed to find her family. She knew that something was not right. She found the boys' cell phones and their tablets in their respective rooms, so she knew that there was no way that she was going to be able to get a hold of her sons or track them. As Mindy fought her panic and tried to remain level-headed, she called the police. She tells the 911 operator what's going on in the current situation, and they ask her if she's worried that Paul might try to hurt himself or the kids. And she responds by saying she doesn't know, she's not sure, and that all of this is just so weird and out of the ordinary that she doesn't know what to think. I can't imagine walking into the situation that Mindy found herself in that morning because, I would be terrified and confused because that behavior is obviously concerning, like seeing the post and those pictures and then being gone. You don't know what to think, but you can't help but think like something's way wrong, something's off. And according to her, Paul had never explicitly said that he was like gonna hurt himself or others, so I would just be terrified and confused. I'm sure that's probably along the lines of what Mindy was feeling. Now, during the 911 call, as she was talking to the operator, she actually got a text message from Paul. But this text was anything but reassuring because it read, "You should have put your family first. Now it's too late. You're so selfish. You're gonna have to live with this for the rest of your life." Mindy responded by saying, "Please don't hurt yourself or the boys. Please come home." But he never responded to this message. Based on her report, the police started looking for Rex and Brody and Paul immediately. Now, I've seen it reported both ways. I've seen it reported that police were able to track Paul's phone to determine his location. And I've seen other reports that say they were tipped off about where he was when neighbors recognized his car outside of the vacation home that they had. So around 7 a.m., the police in Gainesville contacted the police in Dixie County, which is where Paul's vacation home was located. Both police departments raced to the home, but they ended up being just minutes too late. At 7:14 a.m., neighbors called police to report a fire at the Reinhardt's family vacation home. Flames could be seen through the window, and there was a car in the driveway, which made them worry that the Reinhardts could be in the house. Within minutes of this 911 call, police arrived at the scene, but the flames were blazing so fiercely that it was impossible for anybody to enter the house. When the fire department arrived, firemen were able to enter the home wearing protective gear. But as their report states, there was no one to save. In an upstairs bedroom engulfed in flames, Rex and Brody lay dead on a bunk bed, with Paul at the foot of the bed. The three of them were already gone, and with all of the smoke, firefighters had a hard time even identifying the bodies. It's believed that Paul Reinhart killed his two sons before starting the fire and taking his own life. His messages to Mindy and his posts to Facebook that morning paint a picture of a disturbed, desperate man who sought to hurt his estranged wife by the annihilation of the two people that she loved the most, her sons. Filicide is the killing of your own children. And many filicide perpetrators commit or try to commit suicide after the fact. These filicide-suicide cases share many interesting patterns. The Journal of the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law published an interesting study in 2005 that addresses research spanning multiple decades and multiple countries. This study included quite a considerable amount of data, including autopsies, family interviews, mental health reports when available. And all of this information together helped them compare and contrast a lot of symptoms and other factors that could help us in the future determine whether or not somebody is at risk for a filicide suicide. Research in this study indicates that there are 5 different types of filicide. First would be altruistic, meaning that the parent thinks that what they're doing is actually something good. The second, acutely psychotic reasoning. The third would be accidental filicide, or death occurring because of abuse, neglect, maltreatment. The fourth type of filicide is an unwanted child. So somebody has a kid that they never really even wanted, and therefore they commit filicide. And the fifth reason why somebody might commit filicide is for spousal revenge. And I think that the case of the Reinhardt family murders fits perfectly into a spousal revenge filicide suicide. Which is interesting because statistically, spousal suicide is one of the more rare motives for committing filicide. But based on Paul's last words to Mindy, we can tell that he did this specifically to cause her pain and suffering. I believe that in Paul Reinhardt's mind, killing his kids was an act of revenge on Mindy for filing for divorce. He was really hurt and upset by her decision to move on without him. And I think that him deciding to kill his kids was his way of getting back at her. Some filicide suicide cases are also known as familicide, which means it's like a family annihilator, the killing of an entire family. And of course, in this case, Mindy was left alive, but she was left alive to suffer. And the research study that I referred to earlier, as published in the Journal for the American Academy of Psychiatry and the Law, it classifies many familicide perpetrators as the male heads of households, which Paul was, who seek to wipe out their entire family, who is either paranoid, depressed, intoxicated, or a combination of both. As of now, we don't really know if Paul Reinhart was intoxicated when he committed filicide suicide. But we can tell, even though he never had a mental diagnosis, that there was something going on with him. He could have been depressed. Could have been a lot worse than that. Even though we don't have a mental health diagnosis to confirm that, I think he definitely was at the end of his rope and couldn't see a light at the end of the tunnel. His actions are eerily similar to that of his brother Eric's back in 2014. The 2005 study also says that 43% of parents who commit filicide suicide had seen a mental health practitioner before the crime. Of the 30 perpetrators who made up this 43%, 2 of them sought mental health treatment the day before they committed their crimes. Everybody else who was a part of this study had not seen a mental health practitioner, even though friends and family state that they expressed mental turmoil themselves and the people around them were worried about them and thought they had mental health issues. The conclusions of this study really focus on assessing the mental health of the parents in question. In order to recognize some of the risk factors associated with filicide suicides, we need to be more aware as a society, as community and family members, and mental health practitioners need to start asking some really difficult questions. The study suggests that mental health assessments regarding the safety of their children should be administered whenever anybody fears that a person is at risk for filicide or suicide. This study compared dozens of filicide and filicide suicide cases to determine what some of the common similarities are. Because once you can recognize some of the common characteristics in these cases, we could possibly determine some risk factors. And that's exactly what this study did. And it's super interesting. I would love to do a whole video simply about everything that this study covers, because I think it's really helpful information. Treating mental illness amongst parents, especially young, depressed parents, is extremely vital to a child's well-being. This study states that the phenomenon of filicide suicide is different than any other type of murder. Unfortunately, Mindy is left to grieve the loss of her 2 boys and her husband. The life that she built for almost 20 years is gone. There was a memorial for the 2 boys in Gainesville, and it was held on a baseball diamond where everybody got up and shared wonderful stories that they had about the boys, and even Mindy herself spoke in their honor. I think that is incredibly strong of her, considering that this happened just like a week or so after their deaths. So my heart really goes out to Mindy, and I can't even begin to imagine what her healing process is going to be like after a tragedy like this. But hopefully we're going to see more studies and more time dedicated to understanding why these things are happening. I can't help but think back to the Chris Watts case and how there were detectives going to interview him even a year or so after he had already been sitting in jail and the case had been closed. But the reason that they're still talking to him, or that they were still talking to him, was to gain information about where his mind was and what caused him to snap and end up becoming a family annihilator. And this is important because the more we know about why this stuff happens, the better we're going to be able to recognize the risk factors in other people and hopefully stop it, because these cases are some of the worst murder cases imaginable. I don't know how anybody could ever harm a child. It's just disgusting. I'm sure that Paul Reinhart is, occupying a special place in hell next to Josh Powell, and he can stay there for all of eternity for what I care. But I don't want to focus on him. I want to end this video thinking about Rex and Brody. Those boys missed out on a lot of life, but it seemed like the life that they lived was very full. They had a mother who loved them, teammates and friends who adored them. So I hope that we can keep their memory alive and send some positive vibes to Mindy in this terrible time. She is going through probably the worst thing she's ever experienced, and I can't even begin to fathom how she must be feeling right now. So unfortunately, that's where this case ends. It doesn't really end on a happy note. There isn't justice currently because Paul took his own life. Hopefully Mindy will eventually find some peace, and I'm sure it's going to take a lot of work, but she seems like a really strong woman, and if anyone can get there, it's her. So on that note, I'm gonna leave you guys. So thank you again for being here and sticking it out for another one of these true crime videos. As always, stay safe, stay healthy, and take care of each other, okay guys? That's all for now. I'll see you in my next video.